He mopped floors like a ghost, until a four-star general stopped everything and saluted him like a legend. What happened next left the entire airport in tears. Welcome, dear friends. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or like your best days were behind you, this story is for you. Airports are places of constant movement, but sometimes those who stand still carry the most powerful journeys inside them. Today's story will stir your heart, awaken memories, and perhaps change the way you look at others forever. Please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and share your own airport memories in the comments. We read every one of them. And if this story touches you, consider leaving a super thanks to help us continue telling stories that matter. Now, let us begin. The morning shift always began before the sun touched the runway. At gate B12, the terminal was quiet, the way only airports could be at 5:13 a.m., silent, yet somehow full of waiting. Walter Reed, no relation to the hospital as he often joked, pushed his mop across the polished floor with the kind of care most people reserved for sacred things. 78 years old, his back was slightly hunched, but his motions were steady, deliberate. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows, and his own followed him like a quiet companion. No one ever noticed Walter. Not really. He wore a faded blue janitor's uniform with his name stitched in cursive on the pocket. His white hair was thin, his glasses thick, and his shoes were orthopedic. To most, he looked like every other old man trying to keep busy, invisible in a place built for departures and arrivals, for goodbyes and hellos, not for lingering. But Walter wasn't lingering. He belonged here. He knew the rhythm of the place better than any schedule board. He could hear a delayed flight coming before it was announced, sense when a traveler had just received bad news, and tell, without fail, if someone was saying goodbye forever or just for now. He rarely spoke, but he always watched. As he passed a row of empty seats, a young businessman walked right by him, talking loudly into his phone, oblivious to the man he nearly knocked over. Walter didn't flinch, just kept cleaning, eyes steady, like a soldier marching his post. There was something in Walter's silence that felt chosen, not the silence of loneliness, the silence of someone who had once lived loudly and no longer needed to. The only thing that seemed to matter to him was the ritual. Wipe, rinse, dry, row by row, day after day. His cart was always neat, supplies folded just so, coffee never spilled, no trash left behind. To the staff he was Walt, reliable, quiet, never called in sick, didn't join the birthday cakes or secret Santas, never missed a shift in 20 years. To the passengers, he was furniture, background noise. But that day, this ordinary blue-skied Tuesday, something would happen that would make everyone stop. Something that would strip away the uniform, the mop and the quiet. Something that would remind everyone watching that some legends don't wear medals. They wear work boots, and sometimes they mop the floors we walk on. Walter moved like clockwork, but his mind was anything but mechanical. Every morning, after finishing his route through Gate B, he'd stop at the same window overlooking the tarmac. His hand, always gloved in latex, would rest gently on the edge of the glass. The sun had finally begun to rise now, casting a golden haze over the runway, like the opening scene of a forgotten film. He didn't smile, but something softened in his face. A flicker of memory, perhaps, the kind that didn't need words. To anyone else, he was just taking a break, but inside, Walter was traveling. Backward, he saw flashes. A young man in a crisp uniform, a woman in a floral dress running to hug him, the swing of a duffel bag over a broad shoulder, the sound of propellers roaring to life, and then silence. That was the cruel magic of memory. It didn't ask permission. It didn't care about routine. It seeped into the cracks, even in airports filled with noise. Walter turned away from the window, returning to his cart like a man waking from a dream. He adjusted the mop handle, wiped his glasses with the hem of his sleeve, and rolled forward. Always forward. In the staff hallway, past the security office, was a small janitor's closet. No one ever went in except Walter. Inside, among the bleach and brooms, he kept a small, dented tin box on the top shelf. He opened it with hands that trembled more than they used to. Inside, a folded American flag wrapped in plastic. A black and white photograph of a young platoon, all smiling, all gone. A bronze star tucked under a note that read, "For gallantry beyond expectation," and a worn letter, yellowed and torn at the edges, addressed only as, "My dearest Eleanor." He didn't open the letter. He never did, just looked at it like one might look at a wound that never fully closed. 32 years, he whispered, almost to the mop itself. "Still hear your voice, El." There was a knock at the closet door. A young worker, Miguel, maybe 19, peeked in with earbuds half dangling. "Hey, Walt! Vending machine ate my dollar again. You got a spare?" Walter reached into his pocket and handed him a neatly folded bill. Miguel grinned and left without saying thank you. Walter didn't mind. Kindness for him wasn't currency, it was duty. He looked once more at the contents of the box, then closed the lid carefully and placed it back on the shelf. Locked the closet. Outside, the airport was waking. Announcements crackled over the loudspeaker. Babies cried, wheels rolled, time moved. Walter took a deep breath, gripped the mop, and stepped back into the noise. No one knew what he carried, not in his hands, but in his heart. But soon, they would. The boy couldn't have been more than 10, maybe 11 tops. Freckles scattered across his cheeks like constellations, and a well-worn backpack bounced behind him with every step. He sat cross-legged near Gate C6, a toy fighter jet clutched in one hand, his chin resting on the other. His parents, lost in conversation with the airline desk, were too busy to notice the way his eyes followed Walter as he mopped. Back and forth, back and forth. Walter felt the stare before he saw it. Decades of training had left him attuned to even the smallest shifts in atmosphere. He glanced sideways and met the boy's gaze. Most kids looked away when caught staring. This one didn't. He just tilted his head and asked, plain as day, "Mister, were you in the army?" Walter froze. Just for a second. The mop paused mid-stroke, dripping silently onto the floor. Then he straightened up, adjusted his glasses, and turned to the boy with a steady voice. "Why do you ask?" The boy shrugged. "You stand like my uncle. He was in the Marines, and you always look around like you're checking for danger, like in the movies." Walter allowed the hint of a smile, a rare thing. "Smart kid." The boy smiled back. "So, were you?" Walter looked down at his hands. So many years of scrubbing and sweeping, but they still held the grip of a soldier. "I was," he said quietly, "a long time ago." "Cool," the boy whispered, awestruck. And just like that, the moment passed. The boy's parents called him, and he scampered off, leaving behind a silence deeper than before. Walter returned to his work, but something in him stirred, something old and heavy like a locked door creaking open. No one had asked him that in years, decades maybe. Most people assumed he was just an old man killing time with a mop. But that boy, he'd seen something. Later that afternoon, Walter sat on a bench near the food court, sipping his usual black coffee from a paper cup. He watched a family reunite in hugs and laughter, watched a woman cry quietly near an empty gate. He saw everything. He always did. But now, he felt seen. It was a strange, vulnerable feeling, and it scared him. He reached into his pocket, touching the edge of the folded letter he always carried, the one addressed to Eleanor. His fingers lingered there for a moment, like a soldier reaching for a medal hidden beneath the uniform. The boy's voice echoed in his head. "Were you in the army?" He closed his eyes, took a breath, and whispered to no one, "I was more than that." And soon, the world would know. That night, long after the crowds had thinned and the intercom had gone silent, Walter lingered by the glass doors near the baggage claim. The terminal lights dimmed. Cleaning crews passed by with soft nods, but no one spoke to him. He liked it that way. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the windows. It wasn't a heavy storm, just the kind of soft, rhythmic drizzle that made the world feel quieter, more reflective. Walter sat alone on a bench meant for waiting passengers, but he wasn't waiting for a ride. He was remembering. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Tucked inside was a photograph, edges curled, colors faded. In it, a young Walter stood beside a woman with kind eyes and a Sunday smile. Her name was Eleanor, his wife. The photo was taken on the day he shipped out. Her hands had been shaking when she pinned the letter to his chest. "Don't open it until you really need it," she'd whispered. He never had. Not even after the letter came that she was gone. Cancer. Fast. Merciless. While he was deep in the jungle, saving strangers, the one person who waited for him had slipped away. Walter closed his eyes. The memories came in waves. The sound of helicopter blades slicing through humid air. Boots trudging through mud thick with fear. The cry of a wounded man calling for his mother, and Walter moving through gunfire, dragging 3 bodies to safety, not knowing if he'd make it out himself. He had made it. Barely. But he never stopped carrying the ones who hadn't. The Bronze Star was real. The salute he once gave to a commander as fire lit up the sky, that was real too. But none of it mattered when he came home to silence. No parade, no welcome. Just an empty apartment and a folded note. He had disappeared after that, voluntarily, drifted from city to city, took odd jobs, changed names for a while. But in time, he found the airport. A place where people said goodbye and came back. A place where time moved and he didn't have to. So he stayed. And for 20 years, no one asked who he used to be. Until that boy. "Were you in the army?" The question dug deeper than it should have. It was more than curiosity. It was a call. As Walter placed the photo back into his wallet, he realized his hand was trembling, not from age, but from something older. The trembling of a man who had spent decades hiding in plain sight, and who now might be remembered. He looked around the empty terminal as if expecting to see Eleanor's face in the reflection, but there was only his own, older, thinner, but still carrying the eyes of a soldier. And something inside him whispered, "It's time." It started with a storm. Somewhere over the Midwest, angry clouds had grounded 6 flights, and by mid-afternoon, the terminal was swelling with bodies and frustration. Gate C9 overflowed with people, suitcases stacked like barricades, children sprawled across vinyl seats, voices rising in chorus, complaints, phone calls, sighs. Walter didn't mind the chaos. In fact, he moved through it more gracefully than most. While others grew impatient, he became precise, focused. He pushed his cart between travelers like a ghost, unseen but ever present. A woman cried over a missed connection. A man cursed at a flight attendant. Somewhere a baby wailed endlessly. And Walter, he just kept mopping. But beneath the surface of his calm routine, something was stirring, a tension, an unease. He felt it before he saw it. At exactly 3:42 p.m., an announcement came over the intercom. "Attention passengers, a high-security escort is arriving at Gate C9. Please remain behind the marked area." The crowd turned, curious. 2 TSA agents appeared first, followed by airport security, and then, stepping off the jet bridge, came the unmistakable figure of a decorated military officer. Tall, commanding, silver stars glinting on his shoulders, medals adorning his chest, a 4-star general. The terminal fell quiet. Phones came out, heads turned, children pointed. Even the airline staff stood straighter. Walter, midway through cleaning a juice spill, paused. His grip tightened on the mop handle, his jaw clenched. He knew that man. He hadn't seen him in over 50 years, but some faces were burned too deeply to forget. Especially when those faces once stared back at you from a foxhole, terrified and 19. General Robert Langston. Back then, just Bobby. Walter stood perfectly still. The world moved around him in slow motion. He watched as the general scanned the terminal with a practiced gaze. Langston wasn't looking for a ride, or a car, or press. He was looking for someone. And then, their eyes met. Walter's heart thudded once, hard, as if trying to jumpstart something long buried. The general froze. In that instant, something shifted. You could feel it in the air, like static before lightning. The general turned to his escort, whispered something, and then, breaking protocol, began walking toward the janitor. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Walter didn't move. Couldn't. The man who had once given orders across battlefields now approached with deliberate reverence, each step echoing louder than the last. And then, the general stopped 3 feet away from Walter, straightened his back, raised his hand to his brow, and saluted. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "it is an honor to see you again." A stunned silence fell over the terminal. Someone gasped. A mother whispered, "Why did he call him sir?" A man lowered his phone, unsure of what he was recording. Even the security guards looked confused. Walter said nothing, but his eyes told a story none of them could have imagined, and it had only just begun. For a few seconds, no one breathed. A 4-star general saluting a janitor, a man in pressed dress blues, bowing his head before someone in scuffed shoes and a faded name tag. The silence was deafening. Walter didn't return the salute. Not yet. He simply looked at Langston, those sharp, weathered eyes measuring the man before him. General Langston dropped his hand, but not his posture. "You saved my life, Sergeant," he said, voice clear and unshaken. "I never forgot. I never will." Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Sergeant?" Walter didn't flinch. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. "I told you back then not to run into that clearing." Langston gave a rueful smile. "And I did anyway. That's why I got shot." "You were stubborn even then. You dragged me back bleeding through 300 yards of enemy fire," the general continued, "held the line when the others fell. That day, you were the highest-ranking man in my world." More silence. Phones now pointed directly at them, live streams, recordings, faces blinking in disbelief. Someone muttered, "Who is this guy?" Walter finally moved, set the mop aside, straightened his back, not fully, but enough. The soldier still lived in his spine. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly. "No, Sergeant, you went beyond." Langston reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "After all these years, I found you, and I've brought something." Walter frowned as he took it, slowly unfolded the paper. It was a commendation, new, crisp, bearing the signature of the Secretary of Defense. "You were recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross," Langston said. "It got buried, lost. Politics, timing, but not anymore." Walter stared at the words. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes remained sharp. "Why now?" Langston hesitated. "Because heroes don't get to disappear, not if I can help it." There it was, that old fire in Walter's chest, the one he thought had long gone cold. Recognition, respect, something deeper than medals or ceremonies. He looked at Langston, not the general, but the boy he once saved, and something inside him softened. Still, Walter's voice was firm. "I'm not interested in the spotlight. Langston nodded. I figured, but the men you led, the ones who didn't come home, they deserve their story told, and you deserve to be remembered. The weight of that truth settled heavy in the air, and then, for the first time in decades, Walter raised his hand. The salute was slow, shaky, but dignified. And when he did it, the crowd erupted in applause. Not polite claps, thunderous, emotional, genuine, not for the janitor, but for the man behind the mop, for the warrior who chose peace, for the soldier who chose silence, and now was being seen. Walter's salute lingered in the air like a photograph being taken in slow motion. It was not the crisp snap of a young recruit. It was weathered, trembling, and impossibly noble. The kind of salute that comes from a place deeper than duty, from memory, loss, and the long ache of silence. And General Langston stood perfectly still, receiving it like it was the last command he would ever honor. The terminal was silent again. No announcements, no boarding calls. Even the children were still. It wasn't just a gesture between two men. It was a moment that pulled everyone into something bigger. A young mother near Gate C9 began to cry quietly. A teenage boy lowered his phone, hand over heart. A pilot just stepping off shift stood at attention without being asked. Walter finally lowered his arm, and that's when Langston turned to the crowd, not as a general, but as a witness. This man, he said, gesturing to Walter, led a squad of 20 men through the Assault Valley in 1968. They were outnumbered 4-1, pinned down, no air support. He held the perimeter for 12 hours, armed with only a rifle, 3 grenades, and his will. More gasps. The crowd leaned in. He carried 6 wounded men to safety, under fire. He refused evacuation. He stayed behind to cover the rest. Walter stared at the floor, jaw set, every muscle tight with humility and restraint. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were storming. Langston continued. When they pulled him out, barely breathing, he asked only one question. Did the boys make it? He turned back to Walter. They did, because of you. Someone began clapping, then another, then more. It wasn't the loudest applause, but it was the kind that shook you from the inside out. And Walter didn't know what to do with it. He'd spent decades fading into the background, blending into linoleum floors and fluorescent lights. But now, people were seeing him. Not the uniform, not the mop. Him. One child approached, small, with big eyes and a trembling voice. Sir, were you scared? Walter knelt slightly, his knees cracking audibly, and smiled just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. Yes, he said simply, but I had something to come home to. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the letter, the one addressed to Eleanor. He didn't open it, but this time he held it openly, like a medal. I never stopped carrying her, he whispered. Then he stood, straighter than before, and looked around at the strangers who were now witnesses. Let this stay between us, he said softly, not as a request, but as a sacred bond. But it was already too late. The moment was recorded, shared, uploaded, and soon the world would know the name Walter Reed, not the hospital, but the man who mopped the floors with the hands of a hero. By the time the applause faded, Walter had already picked up his mop. He didn't say goodbye to General Langston. He didn't pose for pictures or linger in the spotlight. He simply nodded once like a man checking something off a list and walked away. But the moment refused to disappear. Phones buzzed, texts flew. Someone uploaded the video with the caption, "A general salutes a janitor, then the truth breaks everyone's heart." Within minutes it began spreading, at first just in the airport. Passengers whispered to each other, "Did you see that? Was that real? Who is he?" A young woman in a business suit wiped tears from her eyes and whispered to her colleague, "I almost bumped into him in the hallway earlier. I didn't even look up." A TSA agent pulled up the footage on his phone and watched it twice in silence. In the lounge, a journalist on layover paused his meal, rewound the video, and stared at the face of the man who had just returned the salute. Something in Walter's posture, the raw weight of his eyes, told him, there's a story here no one's told yet. By the next morning, the video had over 300,000 views. News outlets began reaching out. Veterans groups, military historians, old men with tears in their eyes calling family members to say he was one of us. Then someone found the records. Not everything. Walter had done a good job of disappearing. But enough. A name. Sergeant Walter H. Reed, 101st Airborne Division. A unit. The Lost 11. A battle. A Saw Valley, April 1968. Casualty report. 17 dead. 6 wounded. 1 missing. Presumed killed in action. The missing, Reed himself. Except he hadn't died. He'd walked away. From the war, from recognition, from the world. And had chosen instead to mop airport floors in silence. By noon, Walter's break room locker was surrounded by flowers. Notes, a box of cupcakes with "Thank you for your service" scrawled in icing. Someone printed out a copy of his commendation and taped it above the time clock. Miguel, the young airport worker who used to borrow dollars from him, stood by the janitor closet, shaking his head in disbelief. "He's been here every day," Miguel muttered. "Every single day. I thought he was just some old guy with a routine." He wasn't. He was history hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, Walter sat on his usual bench by the window, sipping his usual coffee. The clouds rolled in again, soft and grey. He didn't want the attention, but deep down, part of him needed to be remembered, not for the medals, not for the wounds, but for the choice he made after the war, to serve without being seen. He touched the letter in his pocket, the one still sealed. Eleanor would have smiled at all this, he thought. Not because he was famous now, but because he'd finally let the world in. By the following week, Walter's name was on every major news outlet, CNN, NBC, even late-night talk shows, not as a curiosity, not just as a viral janitor, but as a hero. Photos from Vietnam surfaced, black and white snapshots of a young man with a hard stare and a softer smile. A platoon behind him, mud on their boots, fire in their eyes. Journalists dug deeper. They found military records confirming his valor under fire. Letters from former soldiers who had served under him. A nurse who remembered treating the sergeant who refused morphine until everyone else was safe. One clip from a 1970 local news segment surfaced. A much younger Walter, speaking at a veterans hospital. He looked exhausted, haunted. He said 4 words, "I couldn't save them." And then he vanished. No trace, no contact, just gone. People began asking, why would a man like that choose silence? Why would a decorated war hero push a mop instead of writing books or speaking on stages? The answer came from a voice they didn't expect. His former commanding officer, long retired, living in Arizona, spoke in a radio interview. "Walter was the best of us," he said, "but he blamed himself for every soldier we lost. Carried that guilt like it was his own skin. When he came home and found out his wife had died, something broke." The host asked, why didn't he seek help? The old colonel was quiet a long time. "Some men," he finally said, "they don't want to be healed, they just want to be useful." That was the truth. Walter never wanted recognition, he wanted redemption. And he found it. One hallway at a time, one floor cleaned, one traveler helped, quietly, anonymously. Back at the airport, the staff struggled to keep up with the mail. Letters poured in, veterans thanking him. Children drawing pictures of him as a superhero. Widows saying his story helped them believe their loved ones hadn't been forgotten. Still, Walter remained the same. He came to work, punched the clock, kept cleaning. Until one afternoon, a small ceremony was held near Gate C9. Just airport staff, no cameras, no press. The general returned, this time without a uniform. And in front of the people Walter had worked beside for 2 decades, he knelt and handed him the medal that had been lost to time. Walter took it without words. His hands trembled as he held it. And then he opened the letter, the one from Eleanor. Inside, just one line. "If you come home, live the kind of life that honors those who didn't." He folded the paper slowly, eyes glassy, chest full. He had, in silence, in service, in shadow. But now, finally, in light. The sun was setting over Terminal C when Walter stood by the window one last time. The light poured in golden and warm, casting long shadows on the floor he had walked for 20 years. But today, he wasn't holding a mop. He wore a dark blazer, crisp slacks, his old boots polished, and pinned to his chest just above his heart was the medal. Not for attention, not for glory, but for closure. Around him stood those who had once passed him by, co-workers, passengers, TSA agents, airline staff. They had gathered not by invitation, but by something stronger, gratitude. A small makeshift podium had been set up near Gate C9. Miguel, the young co-worker, stood beside it, eyes bright with emotion. He tapped the mic nervously. "Mr. Walter Reed, we don't have the right words, but we do have our respect, and today we give it to you the only way we know how." From the corner, a trumpet began to play. It wasn't perfect, slightly off-key, but achingly beautiful. Taps. The same melody Walter had heard too many times on distant hillsides. Now it was for him. When it ended, the crowd stood in solemn silence. And then, from the back of the group, General Langston stepped forward. No rank, no medals, just a man with tears in his eyes and a heart full of something too big for words. He stopped in front of Walter and stood at attention. And for the second time, he saluted. This time, Walter didn't hesitate. He returned it. Strong, steady, whole. 2 men, 2 salutes, one moment that stitched together a lifetime. Then Langston lowered his hand and whispered, "Thank you, Sergeant." Walter nodded, voice low and sure. "I was never alone out there. I just forgot." He looked out the window one last time, and in his mind he saw her, Eleanor, standing on the edge of the tarmac, arms open, smiling. He had come home, not to a house, not to a parade, but to the recognition that his life, quiet, humble, hidden, had still meant something. And as the crowd began to applaud again, Walter stepped back, letting the sound wash over him, not as noise, but as peace. If this story moved you, please leave a comment and share your thoughts or memories of someone you've quietly admired. Tap that like button to help others find this story, and if you'd like to support the channel so we can keep telling stories that matter, please consider sending a super thanks. Every bit helps us continue honoring lives like Walter's. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out the next video already on your screen right now. Because sometimes the ones who walk beside us quietly carry the loudest stories of all.